You know, I don't know if you noticed, this last Tuesday, something very, very important happened in our country. We celebrated Mardi Gras in Louisiana. No, that's not what happened. The President gave a very important State of the Union address on Tuesday this last week. Now look, I'll give it to the President. He is a very, very good speaker, but when you actually listen to what he said in that speech, the President basically doubled down on the same liberal philosophy he has governed according these last 4 years. Now what do I mean by that? When you really listen to his speech, it was more government. It was more taking money out of the private sector to fund the government economy. You know, it's interesting to me. During this national recession, there's one city whose economy has done very well, and that's Washington, D.C. Even though the national debt is at $16 trillion going to 17, even though government is spending 24% of our GDP, our record in post-World War II peacetime years, you've got this president saying he wants more of our taxes, more of our spending, and it just seems to me like there's no limit to what he wants to do when it comes to growing and creating new government programs. And indeed, it seems to me there is a very important choice we face as a country today. On one side, you've got President Obama saying we need more government. We've got to go from the greed from Wall Street to the greed of Washington, D.C. We've got to take more taxes, more dollars out of the private sector economy, grow this government to be even bigger and more intrusive in our lives, as it seeks to redistribute rather than grow the economy. That's one view of where we go. But there's another view. And you know, I know there's been a lot of introspection in the Republican Party about how do we win elections, how do we become the majority party, how do we get back on the right path. And I certainly don't think it's by abandoning our principles or changing our timeless beliefs. Rather, I think as a party, it is so important to remind the American people that we are an aspirational people. We are an aspirational party living in an aspirational country. What does that mean? That means as Americans, we always think our best days are ahead of us. As Americans, we believe the circumstances of your birth shouldn't determine your outcomes as an adult later in life. We believe you don't have to be born. You don't have to be born into the right neighborhood, the right zip code, the right family, the right parents, the right gender, the right race in order to do well in this country. We believe anybody who's willing to work hard and get a great education should be able to do better than their parents. Every generation has left behind more opportunities for our kids than we inherited from our parents. And our challenge is to make sure we're not the last generation that can say that was true. We must make sure that we're not mortgaging our children's and our grandchildren's future. So what does that mean? You know, last year I came and I talked about educational policy. I want to start there, but then I want to move to a broader theme. Because I truly believe as a Republican Party, we must not be the party of austerity, we must be the party of growth. But before I get there, I want to give you an update on educational policy. Because to me, this is such a critical issue for every state, and indeed for our entire country. You know, in Louisiana, I'm proud of many things we have done. My first year, we revamped our ethics code, going from 44th worst on legislature disclosure according to the Center for Public Integrity to #1 in the entire country. I'm proud that we've cut our state budget since I've been governor 26%. We've got fewer state employees than we've had in decades. Our credit rating has been upgraded 6 different times, highest that it's been in decades. We've cut taxes several times. We are a top 10 state for private sector job creation. For the first time in 25 years, we have more people moving into Louisiana rather than leaving our state. We've got the top rated workforce training program in the entire country. And I could go on and on, and I love bragging about my state. Our unemployment rate's 5.5%. We've been below the national average every single month during this national recession. Unlike so many states, we've got more people working than before the recession started. But I'm here to tell you this. It is great that we've cut taxes. It is great that we have made it easier to raise a family and create jobs in Louisiana. But if we don't get education right, we're not going to be competitive going forward. It is the single most important thing we can do to preserve those opportunities for our children. 70% of the employers that want to move into Louisiana, expand in our state, invest in our state, tell us one of their top 2 concerns is finding a skilled worker. Look, there are a lot of practical reasons we should all worry about education. If you're interested in lowering your crime rates, if you're interested in growing your economy, if you're interested in improving your health care outcomes and cutting social spending and cutting taxes, It's all going to come down to education. I really believe the states with the most educated, the most skilled, the most productive workforces are the states that are going to win in today's global economy. And make no mistake about it. Missouri, Louisiana, we're just not competing with Kansas and Texas and our neighboring states and our regional states anymore. We're competing with Brazil, we're competing with China, we're competing with countries all over the world. But you know, I think it's more than just a practical imperative. I think there's also a moral imperative for us to care and worry about education. If we really believe that any child can grow up and do better than their parents, it starts with making sure that every child's got a great education. Now, we all like to believe that's true. We all like to believe we've got equal opportunity in America. We all like to believe that every child, as moms so famously tell their children, can grow up to become president, can grow up and start their own businesses, can grow up and become doctors and engineers and accountants or whatever they dream of becoming. But the reality is that's not true in every neighborhood across this great country. We all know that there are families, and certainly I'm sure that folks listening today, you can probably make sure you will move into the right neighborhoods to make sure that your children can go to great public schools. Or you'll make the sacrifices to save the dollars to make sure that you can send your children to great private schools. But the honest truth is we've got too many kids trapped in failing schools all across this great country. Let's be honest, if you're in your 50s, America ranked #1 in the entire world in educational achievement and attainment when you were getting your education. If you're in your 20s, we ranked about 16th when you were getting your education. Ranked about 17th and 25th when it comes to science and math. Doesn't sound like a great cheer, does it? We're number 16. How in the world are we going to remain a superpower, maintain our quality of life, indeed, maintain our economic growth, if we don't go back to being the best country when it comes to educating our children? Now, when you look at it, we have doubled per student spend, even controlling for inflation since the 1970s, yet outcomes are flat. Next to Luxembourg, we spend more money than any other country, yet we're still not ranked amongst the top countries when it comes to science, math, and other outcomes. So it's not about throwing more money at the same old problems. Look, I'll tell you in Louisiana. I'll tell you a quick example in Louisiana. In Louisiana, a third of our kids were below grade level. 44% of our schools were rated failing. We spent over $1 billion of our state's taxpayer dollars on failing schools. We said enough's enough. We set out to change our school system, and I'll tell you, last year when I came to talk to you, we proposed all kinds of laws. I want to talk about 2 laws that we passed, and the change and the difference they're making in our state. The first is a very simple concept. We said we should let the dollars follow the child, instead of forcing the child to follow the dollars. What does that mean? That means every child learns differently. We shouldn't have a one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to educating our children. Some children will do great in traditional public schools. Some children will do great in charter schools. Other children will do great in online schools. Some kids will do great in parochial schools, independent schools, homeschooling, dual enrollment schools, all kinds of programs. The point is every parent knows what's best for their children. So we said in Louisiana, why don't we break down those barriers? We started a pilot project my first year as governor in New Orleans, where we allowed kids to take these scholarships. We started off with low-income kids in failing public schools and let the dollars follow the child. This is what we found out. We saved thousands of dollars per child. It was cheaper. It was cheaper to give them scholarships and let them choose the schools they wanted to attend, and they got better academic scores. They did better academically than the kids left behind in those other public schools. So we said, why not do this statewide? Well, the head of one of the teacher unions said this in Louisiana. He said, poor parents don't have a clue when it comes to making choices, educational decisions for their children. You know, I can't think of a more offensive thing to say. I gathered a group of moms the next day at the governor's mansion to meet with them, and they told me 2 things. They said, Governor, we know our children's needs better than the bureaucrats in Baton Rouge or Washington, D.C. And they said, we make decisions for our children every single day. And they're exactly right. So we empowered parents in Louisiana by passing the most sweeping, comprehensive, choice-based legislation. And now many states are considering similar types of laws. But the second thing we did, and this is so important, we said we need to have a great teacher in every classroom. All the research shows, all the data shows that the single most important thing the state can do in terms of improving the quality of education outcomes is making sure there's a great teacher in the classroom. Now look, if you want to invest in buildings and technology, that's all great. But the first thing you've got to do is to make sure there's a great teacher. And you know, even without looking at the research data, we all know instinctively that's true. Every one of us here remembers that great teacher that took an interest in us, that motivated us, that was harder on us, that saw some potential in us. Then you look at the academic research. There's a guy out at Stanford that has shown that having a good teacher will actually improve your child's earning power over the life of their careers by thousands of dollars, on average tens of thousands of dollars if they have a great teacher. There was some other research that showed if your daughter has a great fourth grade teacher, now think about this, if your daughter has a great fourth grade teacher, she is more likely to go to college, less likely to become pregnant as a teenager, all linked to having a good fourth grade teacher. And yet you look at our policies. They seem to do everything but encourage great teaching. You look at how we hire, fire, compensate, and evaluate our teachers. We said in Louisiana, what if we had a policy that said, instead of rewarding teachers based on how long they've been breathing, let's reward them based on how well they're actually doing in teaching our students. Kids were below grade level, yet 98% of the teachers under the old tenure rules were being rated effective every single year. How does that make sense? So we overhauled our teacher evaluation system to say that we're only going to give tenure to the very best teachers, and we're going to link everything we do, from hiring, firing, paying, evaluating teachers, to student achievement. We'll measure the students at the beginning of the school year, measure how they're doing at the end of the school year, and reward teachers who are growing that achievement. And that way you control for kids who are underprepared when they started the school year. It is so frustrating. You listen to teachers, and they'll tell you. I'll get a student I'll be next to a classroom, and that teacher next door, she's not working hard, and her kids come into my classroom underprepared. And I show up early, and I stay late, and I work hard, and I get my kids, I teach them how to read, I teach them how to do math. There's no recognition, there's no extra compensation. I mean, how would you run your business if I came and told you, number one, you've got to pay your employees based on how long they've been there, not how productive they are. And secondly, we're going to make it virtually impossible for you to get rid of employees that aren't producing, aren't doing a good job. Well, you probably wouldn't stay in business very long. So in Louisiana, we've said we want a great teacher in every classroom. And by the way, we've invested the resources. Even as we've cut the overall budget 26%, we've actually increased our funding for K-12 funding, actually increased teacher compensation. So for the first time in many years, we're actually at or above the Southern average. And I could talk to you more about other laws we passed, like letter grades and charter schools and other things, but I want to talk to you just for a minute about results. You know, it's very fashionable to look at the city of New Orleans and say that Katrina caused all the challenges in the city of New Orleans. But if we're honest with ourselves, there were great problems in the city of New Orleans even before Katrina. And the public schools are a great example of that. New Orleans' public school system was one of the worst public school systems in the entire country. We had a valedictorian of her high school. This was the little girl ranked #1 in her entire high school before Katrina. She got an 11 on her ACT. She wasn't even allowed to graduate. She couldn't pass the exams to get her diploma, and this was the valedictorian of her high school. You had schools where it wasn't safe for students. You had schools that didn't have basic supplies. They didn't have toilet paper in the bathrooms. They didn't have paper, pens, pencils in the classrooms. You had schools that were failing our children. Indeed, before Katrina, 77% of the children in New Orleans were going to a failing school. Well, after Katrina, we made a decision in how we wanted to rebuild that school system. Today, in New Orleans, 78% of the kids go to a charter school, the highest percentage of any city in America. We used to have 77% of our kids going to failing schools. Now it's down to 29%. We have doubled the percentage of kids doing reading and math on grade level in 5 years. We've got more work to do. But you've seen more progress in a shorter period of time than you've probably seen in any large urban school system in the entire country. Indeed, just a few weeks ago, the Brookings Institute, a group at the Brookings Institute, ranked New Orleans and the RSD, the Recovery School District, as the top-rated school district when it comes to choice and competition and accountability in the entire country. 7 years ago, if I told you that the RSD, or any school district, especially something running schools in New Orleans, was going to be ranked #1 in the entire country, you would have laughed at it. Yeah, we were up there competing with New York and some of the other school districts, some of the other leading school districts across the entire country. And my point, and I want to shift gears, but my point in spending so much time on education is this. Too often you'll hear people tell you, we can only make incremental progress. You've got to just be patient. Well, I'm here to tell you, our children only have one chance to grow up. It's not fair to tell them to be patient. It's not fair to tell them to wait 30 years. They only have one chance to get a great education. And part of the reason I'm so passionate about this is I do think this is an essential component of who we are as an American people and as the Republican Party. We truly believe that every child, every individual can succeed in this great country. That there's nobody from government or anywhere else that should be able to tell you you're not allowed to do well because you weren't born in the right zip code, because your parents don't have that right last name. I think this is an essential issue for not only the future economic health of our country, but also our ability to continue that American dream for all of our children. I also am so passionate about this because personally, my dad has lived that American dream. One of 9 kids, first and the only one in the family to get past the 5th grade. And you all have somebody like this in your family. He was that proverbial parent or grandparent who grew up without electricity, without running water, walked uphill both going to school and coming home from school as well. That parent, if you ever asked for an allowance, wanted to charge you rent for living in his house. But my dad would always tell my brother and me, and he still does to his grandchildren today, he says, look, I'm not going to leave you a famous last name. I'm not going to leave you an inheritance. But I'm going to make sure you get a great education. Because he said, if you get a great education, there's no limit to what you can accomplish in this great country of ours. And that's why I think education reform is such an important issue, not only for our party, but for our country, but it's also part of a bigger theme I want to make today. I want to shift gears and talk about this bigger theme. I think as a Republican Party, we've got to be the aspirational party. We've got to be the party of growth and not austerity. It's one of the most important things I want to share with you today. There's been a lot of introspection after the elections about what we need to do. Well, I think we need to start by recognizing something, and we need to admit this: America is not the federal government. Now, take a minute to think about that. We are not the federal government. In fact, America is not much about government at all. In our country, government is one of those things you have to have, but you really don't want to have a whole lot of it. You know, kind of like your in-laws over the holidays. The reality, though, this is the polar opposite of the political debate in our country today. You think about it, we've got one party in our country today that wants to be in charge of the federal government so they can expand it. You've got another party that wants to be in charge of the federal government so they can get it under control. I'm here to tell you that's a terrible debate. It's a debate fought entirely on our opponent's terms. A debate about which party can better manage the federal government is a very small and short-sighted debate. If our vision isn't bigger than that, we don't deserve to win. In our public discourse today, America is pretty much defined by government by the latest moves that occur in Washington, D.C. If you were to land here from outer space, and if you watched the TV for a week, you read the news for a week, you'd have to conclude that Washington was the hub of America. That what happens in Washington is what drives and dictates the success or failure of America. Now, in addition to Washington, there are a bunch of these outlying areas called states, but they're pretty much just adjuncts of the federal government. Well, I'm here to tell you that is not the idea of America. But this is what America will become if we don't reorient our way of thinking right away. As government grows ever larger, it'll become what America is all about if we let it. This is our challenge. This is what we are here for. Now look at the debates that have dominated Washington in the last few weeks. You had the fiscal cliff, you had the debt ceiling, you had Joe Biden's gun control task force. These are in reality sideshows in Washington that we have allowed to take center stage in our country. As conservatives, we are falling into this sideshow trap. All of these sideshow debates are about government. Government and government power are the leading lady and leading man. Today's conservatism is completely wrapped up in solving the hideous mess that is the federal budget. The burgeoning deficits, the mammoth federal debt, the shortfall in our entitlement programs, even as our president tries to create new entitlement programs. We seem to have an obsession with government bookkeeping. This is a rigged game and is the wrong game for us to play. Today it's the fiscal cliff. Tomorrow it'll be the fiscal apocalypse, and after that it'll be the fiscal Armageddon. But I've got news for you. Our government already went off the fiscal cliff. It happened years ago, and it's happened every year for many years. Today's conservatism is in love with zeros. You know, we just think if we can unite behind a proposal to cut the deficit and debt, if we can just put together a spreadsheet and a PowerPoint and a TV ad, all will be well. But this obsession with zeros has everybody in our party focused on what? On government. By obsessing with zeros on the budget spreadsheet, we send a not-so-subtle signal that the focus of our country is on the phony economy of Washington instead of the real economy out here in St. Louis, in Kansas City, and other cities across our great country. We as Republicans have to accept that government number crunching, even conservative number crunching, isn't the answer to our nation's problems. We've also got to face one more cold hard fact. Washington is so dysfunctional today that any budget proposal based on fiscal sanity would be deemed not serious by the media. It would fail in the Senate, and it wouldn't even make it to the president's desk where it would be vetoed anyway. Any serious proposal to restrain government growth is immediately deemed not serious in Washington. The balanced budget amendment, not serious in Washington. Term limits, not serious in Washington. Capping federal growth by tying it to private sector economic growth is deemed not serious in Washington. By the way, we have each of these reforms in our state constitution in Louisiana, and they've worked very, very well for many years for the people of Louisiana. The truth is, nothing serious is deemed serious in Washington. When then Senator Obama voted against raising the debt ceiling, he said he was doing so because the national debt was at an outrageous $8 trillion. And he clarified for effect, saying that is trillion with a T. Who would have thought that $8 trillion would have been the good old days in this country? Now, President Obama's got our debt over $16 trillion and climbing, larger than our entire economy, and he is not worried about it in the least. He calls it progress. You remember his campaign slogan, he said it was forward. I've got news for the president. If Washington's debt is going forward, America's economy is going backwards. Yeah. Instead of worrying about managing government, it is time for us to address how we can lead America to a place where she can once again become the land of opportunity, where she can once again become a place of growth and opportunity. We should put all of our eggs in that basket. Now, yeah, we certainly do need folks in Washington who will devote themselves to the task of stopping this president from taking America so far off the ledge that we can't get back. We must do all we can to stop what is rapidly becoming the bankrupting of our federal government. But we as conservatives must dedicate our energies and our efforts to growing America, to growing the American economy, to showing the younger generations how America can win the future. That path does not lie in government. If more government were the answer, our economy would be booming right now. That path has been tried. The honest truth is you can't hire enough government workers. You can't give enough taxpayer money to your friends who happen to own green energy companies to create prosperity. The facts are in, that plan is a disaster. Balancing our government's books is not what matters most. Government is not the end-all and be-all. The health of America is not about government at all. Balancing government's books is a nice goal, but that shouldn't be our primary objective. Our objective is to grow the private sector. We need to focus our efforts on ideas to grow the American economy, not the government economy. If you take nothing else away from what I say tonight, please understand this. We must not become the party of austerity. We must become the party of growth. Like, of course, we all know government is out of control. The public knows that too, and yet we just lost an election that we could have won, that we should have won. Yes. We cannot afford to continue fighting on our opponent's terms. The Republican Party has become the party, not only must we become the party of growth, we must become the party of a prosperous future that is based in our economic growth and opportunity that is based in every community in this great country that is not based in Washington, D.C. We have fallen into a trap of believing that the world revolves around Washington, that the economy is based there. If we keep believing that, government will grow so big that it will take us all down with it. If our end goal is to simply better manage the disaster that is the federal government, count me out. I'm not signing up for that. That's not a goal worth attaining. Let's be honest. Which one of you wants to sign up to manage the slow decline of the United States of America? I sure don't. That's what we have Democrats for. Look, the Democrats promise to be the party of more from government, but they're actually the party of less. They're the party of economic contraction, the party of austerity, and the party of less from the economy. The Republican Party is the party of more, the party that creates more from the economy. Margaret Thatcher famously observed this: first you must win the argument, then you can win the elections. And by the way, it's time for all of us to remember, we're not in this just to win elections. We are in this to make America the greatest she can be, to make America the prosperous land of opportunity that she can be. Now, to do this, we will certainly have to win some elections, but first, we have to win the argument. And if this election taught us anything, it's that we will not win elections by simply pointing out the failures of the other side. We must boldly paint the picture of what America can be, of just how brightly America's future can be. So you ask, what does this future look like? How do we win this argument? Well, for starters, we have to recalibrate the compass of conservatism. Now be clear, let me be clear, we don't need to change what we believe as conservatives. Our principles are timeless. But we do need to reorient our focus to the place where conservatism thrives and the real world beyond the Washington Beltway. We must lay out the contrast between liberalism's top-down government solutions and our bottom-up real-world philosophy. We believe in creating abundance, not redistributing scarcity. We should let the other side try to sell Washington's ability to help the economy, while we promote the entrepreneur, the risk-taker, the self-employed woman who is one sale away from hiring her first employee. Let the Democrats sell the stale power of more federal programs while we promote the rejuvenating power of new businesses. We don't believe old top-down, industrial-age government becomes a good idea just because it agrees with us or because we happen to be running it. We must focus on the empowerment of citizens making relevant and different decisions in their communities, while Democrats sell factory-style government that cranks out one dumbed-down answer for the entire country. Now, this means rethinking nearly every social program in Washington, D.C. Very few of them work, in my view, and frankly, the one-size-fits-all crowd has had its chance. If any rational human being were to create our government anew today on a blank sheet of paper, we'd have about a fourth of the buildings we have in Washington, about half of the government workers. We could replace most of the bureaucracy with a handful of good websites. If we created American government today, we wouldn't dream of taking money out of people's pockets, sending it all the way to Washington, D.C., handing it over to politicians and bureaucrats to staple thousands of pages of artificial and political instructions to it, then wear that money out by grinding it through the engine of bureaucratic friction, and then sending what's left of it back to the states, where it all started in order to grow the American economy. What we're doing now to govern ourselves is not just wrong, it is out of date, and it is a failure. We believe in planting the seeds of growth in the fertile soil of your economy, where you live, where you work, where you invest and dream, not in the barren concrete of Washington. If it's worth doing, block grant it to the states. If it's something you don't trust the states to do, maybe Washington shouldn't be doing it at all in the first place. We believe solving problems closer to home should always be our first, not our last option. We believe hiring others far away is the last and least effective way to meet our social responsibilities to others. States shouldn't face a moral dilemma when they try to right-size their own budgets and federal strings stand in the way. While the Democrats work on taking more from working Americans, we should stand for radically simplifying our tax code, not for the benefit of Washington, but to get Washington out of the way. Get rid of the loopholes paid for by lobbyists. Blow up the incentives that Washington uses to coerce behavior from the top down. You know, it really shouldn't be complicated for a taxpayer to fill out his taxes or to live his life without fear of the tax consequences of his choices. Now, I'm proud we enacted the largest income tax cut in our state's history. My goal this year is to get rid of the income tax altogether in the state of Washington. When it comes to education, let the Democrats extol the virtues of our hopelessly antiquated one-size-fits-all factory schools where the child follows the dollars. Let us feature the success of child-centered education solutions that meet the needs of the digital age. Education where the dollars follow the child. These are but a few examples of the way we must fight the battle of ideas, or as Prime Minister Thatcher said, how we must win the argument. Let me conclude by making this observation. America is facing her greatest choice, and the hour is late. We can either go down the government path or the American path. Now, the left is trying to turn the government path into the American path. Shame on us if we let them do that. We believe freedom incentivizes ordinary people to do extraordinary things, and And that makes America an exceptional nation. You know, in the last few years, it's become fashionable to talk about American exceptionalism. The idea that this country is better and different than any other on the planet. As Republicans, we have criticized President Obama for not believing in American exceptionalism. It is imperative that we not only promote American exceptionalism, but we have also got to define what we mean when we say that. During the inauguration, I heard a lot of commentators remark on the uniquely peaceful transfer of power we have in this country. But let's not get confused. Even as we must never take for granted the peaceful transition of power, America is not great because of the design of our government. Our nation is not exceptional because of its commitment to free elections. The genius of America is that our strength and power and growth come from the individual actions of our people. Government doesn't order greatness. Government can't command outcomes that exceed those in other nations. But free individuals, taking risks, building businesses, inventing things out of thin air, and passing immutable values from one generation to the next. That is the root of America's greatness. And that is our mission as we build a new Republican Party. We must shift the eye line and the ambition of our conservative movement away from managing government and toward the mission of growth. It falls to us to show the younger generations the wisdom and the great benefit of the American path. It falls to us to unleash a new dawning of the American dream. The dream my parents came to America for. Our dream of growth, prosperity, and equal opportunity. It is our responsibility to seize this opportunity and lead our country into a new era of possibility, progress, and prosperity. It falls to us to take the ever-fresh principles of freedom and apply them to the future. Make no mistake. I'm not calling for a period of introspection and navel-gazing. Far from it. There's a lot of work to be done. I'm calling for us to get busy winning the argument, and then after that, winning the next election. May God bless you and your families.